I didn't grow up believing in ghosts. Then one morning when we were 16, when my friend's mom picked us up for carpool, I mentioned that I was really creeped out by this bathroom under the stairs in my house that no one ever used. I couldn't exactly define why I felt this way, I just found it eerie. The house I grew up in was an old Victorian home built in the 1800s, so eerie vibes were part of the package. Hearing this reminded my friend of her own creepy bathroom association. She told me that when she lived in the German countryside for a year, there was a little section in the home that no one but her middle sister used, who was about 9 years old at the time. During this time period, her sister would wake up with bloodshot eyes, sometimes even bruises, and feel totally exhausted. They did everything to investigate what was going on, including sleeping in her room, working with a child psychologist, and a school counselor. My friend doesn't remember much from this time period, other than her sister being disturbed by something the year they lived there. She mentioned that she and her other sister, the oldest, also hated using that bathroom because they would always feel off and find thick black hair stuck in the drain, even though each of them had fine blonde hair. At this point in the story, my friend's mom abruptly stopped the car and jerked her head around and said, "That's where the woman, who once lived there, killed herself. She drowned herself in that bathtub." Her mom was clearly shaken. She said part of the reason they moved was because something felt off in the house. During August 2018, my friends and I took a road trip from New York City to Rhode Island. None of us had been to Rhode Island before, so we were excited about the drive, especially because we had rented a Mustang convertible for it. We left a little later than expected. It was about 10:30 p.m., and since it was a busy Friday night, we decided to punch our destination into the Waze traffic app to beat the traffic. Eventually, we started losing steam, so my friend in the backseat fell asleep and I just kept driving along quietly, when my friend in the passenger seat told me to exit the freeway to take a side road. At first, driving on the unlit, winding back roads was relaxing, but then the wind picked up and it got increasingly foggy and misty. I wasn't scared, per se, just a little on edge. I thought about pulling over to put the top up but decided against it since there were no cars in sight. Heavy rain was projected for the entire weekend, so I wanted to get the most out the convertible. So I kept going along as normal, if not a little too fast to get back to the main roads as quickly as possible when something just shifted. I don't know how to explain it other than an unsettling, exposed feeling. I remember pulling my sweater over my legs to cover up. Then my friend up front told me to look at the street sign in the distance. It read, "Purgatory." We woke up our friend in the back seat, who sort of scoffed. Seconds later, we went around a bend where a large red cross was installed on the side of the road with nothing else in sight. We just shrugged it off as a creepy coincidence. By then, we were kind of joking about and indulging in the spookiness, but around the next bend, a big truck came hurtling down the one-lane road, aimed straight at us. Luckily my impulse was to swerve a little to the side, otherwise, it probably would have resulted in a head-on collision. My friend tried to get his license plate number but he sped off, while my other friend found the quickest route away from this particular road. We didn't really discuss what happened afterward because we were too creeped out, and we haven't talked about it since. While writing this story, I decided to look it up. I spent an hour trying to retrace our route and found the little road. It was indeed named Purgatory, and though we didn't notice it at the time, Google Maps revealed that Purgatory Road was situated next to an old graveyard. Curious about this road, I researched it further and discovered that 2 teen girls had died there in August of 2011 in an accident on their way to visit the grave of Rhode Island's infamous vampire, Mercy Brown, who died in 1892. Apparently, they decided to go for a drive down this dark, windy road because they thought it looked haunted. As told on Snap Judgment, I had been on the phone with my then boyfriend and he said something that made me think he was a chauvinistic, not nice person, and I remember telling him that if he knew anything about me, he knew exactly where I was gonna go, and I hung up the phone and got in my car. I drove to the park. The sun was kind of down below the tree line but it wasn't dark yet, and I pulled into the parking lot. I thought it was weird that there were 2 cars pulled side by side and talking to each other. When I got out, the guy in the truck just stared at me in a horrible way. You know, when someone just looks at you like they're looking through you as if you don't exist. I thought, well, this is weird, it's late and no one's ever here. And then I thought whatever, they're leaving. I don't care, I have my own problems. I only took my keys with me because I didn't want a big purse banging around. I headed across the field, which you have to cross through to get to the woods because there's no trail. I was taking my time and calming down, and then I realized it got really quiet. I didn't hear the birds and the squirrels anymore, I just heard something big moving through the woods. I thought to myself maybe it's a dog, and then I heard the voices. The first voice is a male's voice and he said I know I saw her go in this way, she couldn't have gotten that far. Then the second voice comes, and it's quieter, and it says, SHH, shall hear you, okay, so there are two men in the woods and they're looking for something, obviously. And I kept thinking it must be their dog, they must have lost their dog, and then I thought they wouldn't try to sneak up on it. I stood there frozen because that's the kind of person I am. I could hear them getting closer to me, and I don't know how long I stood there waiting for them to get to me, but I was completely frozen. And then I heard the other voice. It was distorted, like if you heard someone talking through a closed door or talking underwater. You could understand what they were saying but the voice wasn't right. It wasn't in my head because it had a volume and a pitch that changed that my thoughts definitely don't do. I could almost feel where it was coming from. It was behind me and a little above like it was taller than me. It just said, go to the river now. I don't know if I was more scared of the fact that there is some disembodied voice or a person talking to me or there are two men in the woods. I listened to the voice because I didn't really have other options. I took off toward the river. I made a ton of noise because I was just going as fast as I could and the voice came back and said, no, quietly. I got to the river and jumped down the embankment. I squished myself against it, squeezing down into the smallest, tightest ball I could. The voice kept telling me to stay, and I just sat there, hoping whoever was in the moods was going to leave and that I wasn't having some kind of breakdown. And I kept hearing them moving through the woods and I could tell they had split off. As I sat there, the voice just kept telling me to stay and quiet, over and over again, like it was trying to comfort me. I could hear what sounded like someone was right above me and if I leaned out, they could see me. But I had to look. I just tilted my head up a tiny bit and I could see the tips of these construction boots hanging over the edge. And I could see hanging next to them, this dirty old rope, just swinging next to them swinging. I don't think I even thought anything, I was so scared. I just tried to not breathe. It felt like hours, but I know it couldn't have been that long. The voice even was completely silent. There was nothing but me hearing this man breathing. He started to walk away at some point, and the voice kept telling me to wait. So I waited, and finally, the voice said, go, now to the field, go now. It was screaming at me so loud, so I ran through the woods and just got out to the field, far from the cars and street. It was getting dark and I could see the parking lot but it was so far away. I'm running and I start hearing footsteps running, and first, they're farther away but they're so much faster than I am, barreling after me, and there was nothing. I fully expected to see at least one of the men there but it was silent. The only thing I could think was that the footsteps must have belonged to the voice. And I hear it again screaming at the top of its lungs that I need to run right now. And the footsteps come back and they're in pace with me, running next to me through the field. I had 1,000 crazy thoughts because none of this made any sense. Finally, I get to my car, and I see both the cars were parked in different places with nobody in them. I refused to look behind me. If there hadn't been a voice, I would probably be a missing persons case. It got me out of there. And now, a few ghost stories directly from the My Domain team. As told by Reddit user Vanilla Gorilla, my daughter was 4 years old when we lived in her last home. I was a single mom at the time, so it was just she and I alone in the home. I always got an uncomfortable feeling in her room, particularly the closet area, but never thought much of it. Until one evening, I had put her to bed and as I was doing chores I walked by her room and heard her whispering. I listened for a bit, thinking she was talking to herself, but it was definitely a two-way conversation, with her saying, "Aha, okay," stuff like that. I walked in and asked her who she was talking to. She smiled uncomfortably and said, "No one." I took her out into the hall and she wouldn't say anything but I could tell she was afraid. Finally, we went outside of the house. She said there was a man in her room who didn't want us in the house, and he had told her this and to tell her mom to leave. I moved us out a month later. She has not since ever had an episode like this.